Hello and welcome back to the William Gomes podcast. I am William Gomes and I am grateful to have you here. In today's episode, we turn to one of the most distinctive and often misunderstood aspects of psychoanalysis. It is something that sets the analytic encounter apart from ordinary conversation, from supportive listening, and from traditional forms of guidance. It is the position of the analyst. The analyst's position is not simply a role, it is a stance, a way of being present that allows the unconscious to speak. It is a position shaped by silence, by listening, and by something called the desire of the analyst. To understand this position is to understand what makes analysis different, what creates space for transformation, and why the analyst's restraint is not a lack of engagement, but a profound form of care. Let us begin by considering silence. In everyday life, silence is often treated as a gap that must be filled. People rush to reassure, advise, or interpret. They feel compelled to keep conversation moving. But in analysis, silence is not emptiness. It is an opening. It is an invitation for the subject to speak in a way they perhaps never have before. When an analyst remains silent, they do not withdraw. They listen with extraordinary attention. Their silence creates a space where the subject can listen to themselves. In this silence, things rise to the surface that do not appear in ordinary dialogue. The subject begins to hear their own words differently. They notice contradictions. They discover surprising associations. They follow paths of thought that would be interrupted in normal conversation. Silence allows signifiers to unfold. It gives the subject time to encounter their own unconscious. It also prevents the analyst from imposing meaning. The analyst's silence is therefore an ethical stance. It protects the subject's speech from being shaped by the analyst's opinions, assumptions, or desires. This brings us to the analyst's listening. Listening in analysis is not passive. It is not simply absorbing content. It is listening for breaks, for hesitations, for repeated phrases, for slips in language. It is listening for the movements of the unconscious, for the way signifiers shift and reveal the logic. The analyst is attuned not only to what is said, but to how it is said. This listening is not interpretive in the everyday sense. It is not about analyzing motives or offering explanations. Instead, it allows the subject's own unconscious to be heard. It gives space for the chain of signifiers to unfold so that meaning can emerge from within the subject rather than from outside. The analyst does not fill silence with reassurance or advice because this would return the subject to the position of the child seeking approval or guidance from the other. The analyst's listening creates a new kind of relationship, one where the subject is responsible for their speech and where their desire can appear in its own form. This now brings us to one of the most important and subtle ideas in psychoanalysis, the desire of the analyst. The desire of the analyst is not personal desire. It is not curiosity, not sympathy, not the wish to fix, cure, or direct. It is something structural. It is the desire for analysis to continue, the desire for the subject's truth to emerge, the desire to hold open the space where the unconscious can speak. To understand the desire of the analyst, we must first understand that the subject is shaped by the desire of the other. People are constantly orienting themselves around the perceived desires of parents, partners, teachers, and peers. They seek approval, acceptance, or recognition. They modify themselves in response to what they believe others want. In analysis, this dynamic must be disrupted. If the subject believes the analyst wants something from them, their speech will shape itself around that imagined desire. They may try to please the analyst, impress them, or avoid disappointing them. This would prevent the unconscious from speaking freely. Therefore, the analyst must maintain a position where their personal desires are not in play. The desire of the analyst is a desire without content. It does not direct the subject toward a particular outcome. Instead, it invites the subject to explore their own desire. It is a desire that leaves room. It is a desire that gives nothing but space. This is why the analyst refrains from giving advice. Advice would impose meaning. It would position the analyst as the one who knows. It would shape the subject's desire rather than allowing the subject to discover their own. The analyst's refusal to advise is not a lack of care. It is a profound act of respect. It recognizes that the subject's truth must come from within. The analyst's position also involves neutrality. Neutrality does not mean coldness or detachment. It means that the analyst does not take sides, does not moralize, and does not place themselves above the subject. Neutrality creates a space where the subject can speak without fear of judgment. It protects the subject's speech from being absorbed into everyday relational patterns. At the same time, neutrality does not mean indifference. The analyst cares deeply about the process, but this care is directed toward maintaining the conditions where the unconscious can appear. The analyst cares by listening, by holding silence, and by respecting the subject's responsibility for their own speech. Another key part of the analyst's position is the use of interpretation. Interpretation in analysis is not explanation. It is not translating unconscious content into conscious understanding. Instead, interpretation is a carefully timed intervention that shifts the subject's relation to a signifier. It is a way of touching the chain of signifiers so that something becomes visible, audible, or thinkable in a new way. Interpretation may be a single word, a repetition, a question, or a gentle redirection. It may be placed where a contradiction appears. It may be used to highlight a slip, an association, or a tension in the subject's speech. Interpretation aims to create a moment where the subject encounters their own unconscious more directly. Because interpretation is so powerful, the analyst uses it sparingly. Too much interpretation would close the space. It would fill the silence with meaning rather than allowing meaning to emerge. The analyst's restraint is therefore essential. The analyst's position also requires something often overlooked. The analyst must occupy the place of not knowing. This does not mean ignorance. It means refusing the position of the one who knows the truth about the subject. The analyst listens as though the subject is the one who knows, even if the subject does not yet know what they know. This stance allows the subject's speech to become the source of insight. It allows the subject to discover meaning through their own words. If the analyst claimed to know the subject better than they know themselves, the subject would return to a dependent relationship where they seek answers from the other. Analysis becomes transformative only when the subject takes ownership of their speech and encounters their unconscious as something that belongs to them. Finally, the analyst's position is ethical. It is grounded in respect for the subject's autonomy and in the belief that each person's desire is unique. The analyst does not direct the subject toward a predetermined goal. They do not impose their own values. They do not aim to produce a particular outcome. Instead, they accompany the subject as they navigate the movements of their unconscious, supporting a process that unfolds in its own time and in its own way. The analyst position teaches us something profound about human connection. It reminds us that listening is not simply hearing words. Listening can be an act of love, an act of respect, and an act of allowing space for another person's truth to emerge. Silence can be a gift. Not knowing can be compassionate. Holding back advice can show deep faith in the other person's capacity to find their own path. As we come to the end of this episode, I invite you to reflect on the way you listen to others and to yourself. Notice the moments when you rush to fill silence. Notice when you assume you know what someone means. Notice when you interpret before hearing. These habits are part of everyday life, but they also reveal how difficult it is to hold the kind of space that analysis invite us to consider. The analyst position is a reminder that transformation happens when we allow the unconscious to speak, when we listen without imposing, and when we honor the complexity of human desire. In our next episode, we will explore late Lacan and the world of knots and links, looking at how the real, symbolic, and imaginary can be tied together and what happens when those ties come loose. It is a fascinating shift into Lacan's later thinking and will help us bring the whole structure into focus. But for now, I hope this episode helps you see the value of silence, the importance of listening, and the transformative potential of approaching others with curiosity rather than certainty. Thank you for listening. This is the William Gomez Podcast. Take care of yourself, stay curious, and I will speak with you again soon.